right. Good morning, modern global people, and welcome to June. You made it. So today is going to be our last official lesson of the second semester. Yay. And we're going to be looking at globalization. So you're going to be using this actively learn tool here, which you should be familiar with. We did that with the Berlin Wall. And we did that with decolonization of Asia and Africa, which was last week's lesson. There's a few of you who have logged into this. There are several of you that have not. So when you are going to do this lesson, if you have never logged into Actively Learn, you may have to sign up for it. It's very simple. You just do a couple of clicks and then you're in. But we're going to be concerned with this lesson today, globalization and its discontents, why there's a backlash and how it needs to change. So we can go ahead and open that up. Erase this. Okay, and I just want to point this out. So you don't just do one question and think you're done. The way this works, if you've never done this before, is you can see there will be some stuff you need to read, and then there will be a question, and then there's nothing after that. In order to unlock the rest of your lesson, you have to answer that question. So don't just answer the one question and think you're done, please, because that would not be good for your grade. Okay, so while we're reading this, we want to consider the question: what are the positive effects of globalization? Or what positive effects of globalization should be preserved or kept, and what negative effects should be protected against? So first, we're going to just kind of define what the heck is globalization in the first place. You may have an idea already, but we'll take a look. And hopefully this picture kind of clues you into what globalization is. We see McDonald's. McDonald's is obviously an iconic company that a lot of people associate with America, but we can see McDonald's is spelled in a really funky way, right? So that's kind of the idea of globalization, where you could go to some country outside of the United States where they don't even speak English, or where their letters don't even look like letters we recognize, and you could still get a Big Mac. And all right, so here we go. A couple other things I want to point out. One, you can this actively learn thing I really, really like, in case you didn't already realize that, for those who have done this already. As you're reading, and this is why I like it, this you can really interact with the reading itself. You can highlight something you think is really, really important. So if you think this is important, you click highlight, take note, and then you can take a note and say, oh, this is interesting, or so basically globalization means this. You can keep it for yourself. You can also share it with the class too, if you so choose. You click that little toggle button. I'm not going to do that right now. You may have also noticed when I highlighted this,
free and
which is
fast
pretty
movement
cool,
of people,
it will
ideas,
speak to you.
capital, and
So you
resources
click here
between countries. This process increased after World War II.
Globalization is the
It
term
has
used to
shaped much of
describe the
how we
free and fast
experience the
movement of
modern
people,
world. From the
ideas,
food that we eat to
capital,
the news
and
stories we
resources
see
between
every day,
countries.
almost
This
every
process
aspect of
increased
life
after
is
World
affected
War
by the
II.
increased
It has
connectivity.
shaped much of how we experience the modern world. From the food that we eat to the news stories we see every day, almost every aspect of life is affected by the increased connectivity.
Okay. So, she, you can change Joanna's voice if you want to hear Joey speak, or you want a British voice or whatever. You can do that too, which is kind of cool. So just a thought there. There was one other thing you could do. Oh yeah, you can translate this too. If this is not your native tongue, you just select the language you want. Let's say Spanish. Let's say you speak Spanish better. And there it is. There's the translation right there for you. Okay, so I'm not going to read this paragraph because Joanna just read it for us, but basically she's saying globalization, or she read that globalization is all about our world today, how there is a huge intermingling and connection between people around the globe. A lot of that, and this, of course, occurred and increased after World War II big time. We can see that in the food we eat. We can also see that, the internet had a lot to do with that too, for sure. So here's some of the pros of globalization. Increased standards of living, spread of consumer products, access to new markets, decreased unemployment, and cheaper products. So a lot of it has to do with business stuff, right? People are around the globe are living better. They have a lot more access to a lot more products and goods. There's a lot more jobs available. Here are some of the drawbacks, though. And you can see I wrote a note here. If you click on it, it'll tell you the note, what this means here. So unemployment in the older industrialized nations. So jobs moved to newly industrialized nations because companies could pay workers less. So an older industrialized nation, America, right? And what's happening, unfortunately, in America, we were for a long time, you could get a job working in a factory. That would be your career. That's what you would do for your life, for your livelihood. And that would be enough to be able to support your family. You would get, a good pension, retirement. But guess what? That stuff costs money. And if you own a business, you want to cut costs anywhere you can. So unfortunately, a lot of these jobs are what's called outsourced, which means they are moved to other countries where they can pay a lot less money to the workers. So places in Central America, for example, places like China, your iPhones that many of you own and love would not be as cheap. And I know they seem expensive, but they would not be as cheap as they are because if they were all made in America, because you'd have to be paying these workers a lot more money, giving them benefits, etc. Globalization causes environmental problems, a faster spread of disease, and we are obviously seeing that right now with coronavirus. Coronavirus probably would not be spreading nearly or have spread nearly as rapidly if this was 200-300 years ago when there was no air travel going on and people were less connected that way. And then, of course, child labor, sweatshop labor. We've seen pictures before of that. Today's backlash. Today, globalization is under attack. There has been a backlash. And if you don't know what backlash means, of course, I wrote a note here. You can click on it and it says a backlash happens when there's anger or disagreement about new changes against it, as seen by the election of Donald Trump to the U.S. presidency, the Brexit vote that saw Britain leave the European Union, and the rise of nationalism in mainland Europe. In each of the above cases, the citizens of certain nations have voted to roll back economic, political, and cultural globalization. Many Brexit supporters were worried about their jobs and the arrival of immigrants. In the United States, much of Donald Trump's support came from the Midwest. The part of the country was most negatively affected by globalization. The Midwest is where lots of our cars used to be made, for example. It's now known as the Rust Belt because there's not much factory work going on anymore. And so, these people elected Donald Trump with the promise by him that he was going to save their jobs and not send them overseas. So what is behind the growing discontent with globalization? Let's dig deeper to find out. The rise of globalization. Today's global economic situation was established just as World War II was coming to an end. In 1944, delegates from the Allied countries met in Bretton Woods, New Hampshire, to establish a new system around open markets and free trade. An open market is one in which prices are based on competition between companies and not set by governments. Free trade allows countries to exchange goods without governments imposing tariffs, quotas, or other regulations. Again, click on this if you need to find out what those things mean. New institutions such as the International Monetary Fund, the World Bank, and forerunner to the World Trade Organization were established to tie national economies to an international system. It was generally felt that greater global cooperation would lead to greater peace and prosperity. So you got to remember World War II, end of World War II. A lot of people thought, it was possible that the world could end, that Hitler and Japan and Mussolini would take over. And Mussolini's from Italy, would take over the world. And so they were looking towards the end of the war for a way to increase this world peace. And they thought, hey, if we could all cooperate and work together in a business sense, this would cause, peace and prosperity in our world. That was the thought, at least. So at first, it began as more of a promise than reality. In the middle of the 20th century, many parts of the world were controlled by communist regimes. Additionally, financial tensions arose because the new trade system was based on the US dollar. At that time, the US dollar was tied to gold. This made it difficult to move money around the world. It was not until the US was no longer tied to the gold standard in the 1960s and fixed exchange rates were removed that it became easier to move money globally. It worked with the exchange rates It worked. With the exchange rates no longer fixed, the global economy was much more fluid. Dollars earned in Europe by U.S. multinational companies could be invested through London in suburban housing projects in Asia, mines in Australia, and factories in the Philippines. As communism weakened around the world, the process of globalization further intensified with China's entry into the World Trading System in 1978 and the collapse of the Soviet Union in 1989. It became even easier to trade internationally. This was a major step forward for globalization, simplifying trade and the movement of capital, companies, and resources between countries. So it doesn't necessarily seem all that bad, right? I mean, you have trade increasing, businesses doing well worldwide. That's a good thing, right? All right, so that brings us to our first question. Which two factors does the article explain resulted in a dramatic increase in globalization? So here's our first possibility. The end of World War II and the formation of international financial institutions. They did definitely talk about that, so I'm going to check that. Remember, it says two factors, so we're going to have two answers. The cancellation of international debts and investments in new industrialization projects. They don't really mention that. The competition between communism and capitalism during the Cold War and the resulting trade negotiations. They did mention that, and the weakening of communism around the world and the removal of fixed exchange rates. They don't really mention that, so I'm going to go with A. I think that's the best answer. And okay, I was wrong. The answer is the weakening of communism around the world and the removal of fixed exchange rates. And so if something like that happens, I did that on purpose, what you can do is you can ask for your answer to be unlocked, and I'll unlock your answer, and you can resubmit your answer. So there should be no excuse for you guys getting a bad grade on this. Okay, and as you can see, once I answered that, the next part unlocked. There's also an explanation here too, in case you're not sure about, well, why wouldn't this be right? I heard them talk about the end of World War II, right? Okay. So, global transfer of wealth. While companies were now able to search the entire world to find the most profitable markets, workers were fixed in place. So, a company like General Motors could move a factory from Michigan to Mexico. This was good for the economy because companies could pay cheaper wages, but it was bad news for industrial workers in the United States. So, we're going to now see some of the problems with globalization. With fewer trade restrictions, manufacturing experienced a global shift. Manufacturing plants and factories moved from areas that paid high wages like North America and Western Europe to areas that paid very low wages in East Asia, such as Japan, South Korea, China, and Vietnam. This helped companies save on their manufacturing costs and brought down the prices of products like iPhones and air conditioners. But many workers who used to make goods in North America and Western Europe lost their jobs. So, good stuff and bad stuff, right? Good stuff is, hey, products are cheaper for the consumer, right? I'm not going to pay $5,000 for an iPhone, but I might pay $800 for an iPhone. I'm not going to pay $100,000 for a car, but I might pay $15,000 or $20,000 for a car. And this globalization allowed that to happen. Problem is, A lot of people who were used to making money, by working in factories no longer had those jobs anymore. If you want to see a little bit more information about that, I posted a video about the Rust Belt that I had mentioned earlier. And you can see people working in a factory in China right there, working on electronics. These changes led to global redistribution of wealth as factories in the Western world shut down, became mechanized, or moved overseas. The living standard of working class people declined. However, the Chinese working class gained more wealth as more factories opened and more jobs were created. In China, the poverty rate fell from 84% in 1981 to just 12% in 2010. So definitely positive for countries like China, even though it's a negative for places like America. Some claim that globalization would eventually raise the living standard for everyone, but older industrial workers in Europe and North America saw little improvement. Workers in the United States who lose jobs because of companies moving overseas don't have many future opportunities. There aren't many chances of obtaining new job training, going back to school, or getting government assistance. It's not surprising that many of these people have turned their backs on the idea of globalization. So that's why people in America, in the Midwest, in the South, who had these jobs and no longer have these jobs, believe that globalization is a bad thing. And it's a big reason why many of them supported President Trump and voted him into office, because he promised to keep the jobs in America. And that remains to be seen if he will make do with his promise. So far, it's not looking very good. All right, let's answer the question. It says, which statement best explains the phrase global transfer of wealth as it is used in this section? Workers in more industrialized nations decided to invest in new technology in other countries, thus transferring their wealth overseas. Well, it wasn't workers. Jobs and wealth moved from countries where workers earn higher wages to countries where workers are paid lower wages. They definitely mentioned that. Exchange rates were no longer fixed, so companies could more freely transfer cash around the world. They didn't mention that. After retiring, workers who were paid well in industrialized nations moved to different countries where the cost of living was lower. They definitely didn't mention that either. So B is going to be your answer. And you can see it's correct. Again, there's an explanation. And again, if you get it incorrect, let me go back up to the incorrect answer just to make sure. There is a way that you can ask me to unlock it. I'll show you that towards the end. And you can redo your question. Okay, so expanding free markets. Over the decades, politicians promoted globalization through trade organizations and agreements such as the 1994 North American Free Trade Agreement, known as NAFTA. The largest international organization of this kind was the European Union, an economic and political alliance of European countries. If you want a little more information on NAFTA, again, you can click here, and you can click here, and you can see, watch a video about it. The EU stands with a small, tight core of Belgium, France, Italy, Luxembourg, the Netherlands, and West Germany. They signed the Treaty of Rome in 1957 to tie former enemies into an alliance that would prevent further conflicts and form a common market to compete against the U.S. Over the years, more countries joined, and in 1993, the European Union was created as a single market with free movement of goods, people, and capital. It also had common policies for agriculture, transport, and trade. The benefits of joining the EU attracted countries that used to be part of the Soviet Union. Today, the EU extends as far as Cyprus and Bulgaria, Malta in the south, and Finland in the north. So, you can see right here. Here's what it looks like. These are all the current members, except for over here, because this is as of June 2016. In June of, I believe it was 2018, England or the United Kingdom decided to leave the European Union. It's known as Brexit, or the British exit. The EU has allowed people to move freely from one country to another. For example, hundreds of thousands of Polish people have moved to the United Kingdom. This has created challenges in terms of providing for the needs of these new immigrants. Some people in the original EU countries, such as France and the UK, are resisting the enlargement of the Union into faraway countries with weak economies and low social welfare payments. People from these poor countries have been immigrating in large numbers to the UK and France. Some see it as a threat to their local culture and economy. So that is definitely a negative of globalization, right? Not a negative that people are immigrating to countries, but the backlash that these people are getting. And we're seeing it play out around the world. Cultural backlash. Globalization has led to greater cultural exchange, including food, movies, values, and lifestyles. Some people welcome this new cultural diversity, while others grow afraid and resentful of immigrants and the different culture they bring with them. Marine Le Pen is a French politician and lawyer. She's the president of the National Rally political party and ran for president of France in 2017, gaining 33.9% of the vote. She's emblematic of politicians who call for a return to the simpler, better times of the past as a cure for the problems that globalization has brought their country. Leaders like Le Pen gained popular support by describing how their country's beloved cultural traditions are under attack from the outside. And hopefully that reminds you of somebody else, namely President Trump, who also kind of has that idea and answer. Okay, so guess what? That's it. Last question. Based on what you've learned about globalization's effects on workers in Europe and the US, why would Marine Le Pen, I'm sorry, this isn't the last question, be appealing to many in France? And you can write whatever you want, but you can say, because France has experienced a lot of immigrants who some think are taking jobs and resources. Many support Le Pen because they want to save cultural tradition in France. You'd hit submit. And there's my response. Oh, by the way, you will be able to see other people's responses. You can always revise your answer as well. Okay. Globalization has been challenged. There's one more question. Globalization has been challenged by religious fundamentalism. This is a focus on the strict literal interpretation of religious writings. With so many people or so many changes occurring around the world as a result of globalization, many people are finding security and comfort in religious fundamentalism. Reclaiming globalization. Globalization has left many people confused about their cultural identity. It has also created many problems related to the economy and immigration, but it is not all bad. It has also improved living conditions through a global trade, reduced conflict between countries, and increased cultural diversity. The challenge for the world now is to shape and guide the process of globalization to produce just and fair outcomes for all people. And so the question is, why is there a backlash against globalization in Europe and the United States? And, some of the things they discussed were people losing their jobs and not being able to have any job prospects after that, right? And in Europe, especially, all these immigrants moving in their opinion, taking valuable resources away from the people who have lived there for generations. Okay, so I'll go ahead and write that now. So in the United States or in the US, many have lost their jobs in factories and see this globalization as a reason for that. Once their jobs go overseas, American factory workers don't have many other job opportunities. So that's the reason in Whoa. Okay, there. I can't believe I did that. And opportunities. Um, that's the reason they mention, at least in the article, for the United States. And in Europe, there has been a backlash on immigrants who some see as taking valuable government resources from the people that are native to this country. All right, so if you live in France, you're thinking, you know what? Who are all these immigrants? They're taking away valuable resources, government assistance, etc. Make sure you hit submit. Okay, and then that's it. You're done. Please reach out over the next week or two. Technically, June 15th is your last day. And we technically meet next Tuesday for our last regular class. Next Tuesday is going to be your last regular school day, whatever regular means nowadays. So from now until then, you should be making up any assignments you're missing. Reach out to me if you need help with those assignments. Some of you have already done that. I'm happy to do a video conference with you. You can even call me or text me, email me, message me on Google Classroom. There's lots and lots of ways to connect with me. I'm usually very quick about getting back to you as well. And get it done. I know this was not an ideal way to end the last 3 months of our school year. But there's school still goes on, and there's plenty of ways for you to be able to get this stuff done. And